Welcome everybody to the June presentation here from Pathwork of California. I'm Janice Yasui. I'm an apprentice helper who graduated from the POC helper program last year. And I am excited to be giving the presentation today. I recognize some faces here and not everybody. So wherever you are, good morning, good evening, welcome. And I'm going to be talking today about self-confidence in relationships. The title of this lecture, based on lecture number 77, is Self-Confidence, Its True Origin and What Prohibits It. And because the theme of this year's monthly lecture series is relationships, I'm going to specifically focus on what does self-confidence look like in relationships? And how can this lecture help us in that regard? What else did I want to say? And I love this lecture. I love this lecture. I've taught it multiple times. And it's interesting because I had material from previous teachings of this lecture. And when I reread it with this lens on relationships, I didn't want to use any of what I had prepared in the past. So this is going to be a new way of teaching this lecture for me. So I'm curious to see how it will go. And what I have planned for us is an interactive exercise. So if you have pen and paper, what I'm going to have us eventually do is like a mind mapping exercise, where it really helps just to sort of take what's kind of rolling around in your mind and your emotions, and just really kind of map it out externally so that you can see it. And I have some examples. I have a personal example of that I'll use as a teaching tool. But then I'd really like us to all walk through that as well and have this experience that I think the lecture is calling us to have. All right, so with that, let me share my screen and do the lecture portion here. And it looks like everyone should be able to see my screen, right? Can someone give me a thumbs up? Okay, thank you. And to kick it off, I wanted to sort of also share some context for why I think self-confidence is important, and this centrality actually of just the self in general in pathwork. There are actually multiple lectures that all along the same theme of self-confidence. There's self-love, there's self-liking, there's self-esteem. Believe it or not, the self-esteem lecture is nothing like this lecture, even though you would think self-confidence and self-esteem would be similar. And then there's sort of the inverse. There's fear of self, and then there's self-forgiveness. So all of this, I want to point out that there's this notion of the self in pathwork, that pathwork likes to explore the self. And for me, this was really refreshing when I first came to pathwork. And my personal story here is that when I was a young adult, I went through a series of depressions. And a friend of mine said to me once, you just think too much about yourself and your own problems. You should think about other people more, and you just need to do some volunteering, and that will solve your problems. And of course, no matter what you say to a depressed person, it just goes into a black hole of making you feel worse. But in particular, there's something objectively wrong with what my friend said, thinking about others and doing altruistic things and so on. But deep down, I knew that there was something more for me to explore. And there was an intuition about working on myself in the right ways, and that this was important to do. And there was something I really wanted to do. And of course, I didn't have the tools at that time, so I ruminated. But when I came to pathwork, it was almost a luxury that this sort of self-exploration it's not really just analysis in the true sense where you're spinning in your head. There's this true, genuine focus on self-exploration and the beauty and the discovery process there that really resonated with me and has continued to foster my personal growth and improve my life. So that's sort of the bigger context of where self-confidence and why this is so important comes in. Of course, and then of course, we also want to have beautiful, meaningful relationships. So here's our agenda for this presentation. The lecture calls out some important terms, so I'm going to walk us through what these important terms are. And then, like I said, I'm going to take a personal example and help use the concepts from this lecture. One more person. Use the concepts from this lecture to just walk us step by step through how do we take a personal example and apply these principles. And we'll talk about how to recognize the forcing current. And then once we have it, how do we go about removing it? And then I'll invite you to do a similar exercise using your own example. And then I'll end with just reminding us what a true sense of self-confidence is like. So here are the three main terms that I think we need to go through in order to work with this material. Self-confidence, the real self, that is, as opposed to in this lecture, it's referred to as the other self, and the forcing current. So first of all, what is self-confidence? And this is not just the dictionary version of self-confidence. This is pathwork. So as you go through and learn about self-confidence, it's not just a noun, it's almost like a way of being. It's a way of being in the world. And it's when there's no doubts about your right action or reaction to external or actually even internal events. There's no wavering. Whatever happens, what you feel is instant and spontaneous. You know deep down this feeling of this is right, this is so. And the guide says, when your real being, when your real self, your intuitive nature manifests, you have self-confidence. And so I wanted to point out that throughout this lecture, the guide refers to the real self also as your intuitive nature. When you read the Pathwork lectures, the real self is a frequent topic, of course. And in this particular lecture, we're being called to feel into this aspect of the intuitive nature being the real self. So the intuition, that's something kind of specific about this lecture and how we're being called to work with the real self. And the guide says, only when your intuitive nature guides and directs you can you trust yourself. And of course, a key component of self-confidence is just trusting yourself. And the guide also says, you know your real self. It's not this faraway thing that we have to go searching for, that we need to be in awe of, and someday we'll get there. This has all happened to you, at least occasionally, we're told. So I'd like to pause for a moment and just have us all do an internal check-in. Use your intuitive self here. Recall a time, close your eyes if you'd like. Recall a time when you let your intuitive nature manifest.
Not.
You might envision a specific time in your life, a time in nature. Just take a minute to recall that scene, embody it, and then describe it to yourself. Just make some notes, mental and even some feeling notes about it. So it's there, and that's, as we sort of dig into the weeds in the next few slides, I wanted to bring this up just to kind of keep that goal in the background, that we can start dissecting some of our negativities, and it's not just for the sake of, dredging up negative material. We know we felt these moments of our real self, and we're really just trying to get back to that, to string more and more of these real self, spontaneous, intuitive moments in our daily life. Okay, so we're talking, like I said, about the real self versus the other self. So the intuitive nature is in contrast to these other things that we actually normally are, most of us, in our daily life. So things like the ego self, the ego mind, and even sometimes our emotions. Our emotions are not necessarily our real self. They might seem spontaneous, but there's a difference between spontaneous and reactive, spontaneous and free flowing in the moment, and reactive based on the past, for example. So anything other than the real self, like the ego mind, the ego self, your emotional self, anything other than the real self does not express real feelings. And this is important because real feelings are what's needed for real relationship. We want to bring our real feelings, our real self, to another person. And the other person needs to see and hear and feel and react and respond to what's real, not what's a defense or something, anything other than real. So when you read the pathwork material, the pathwork comes at all of these concepts that are related from different angles, so we get a really full picture. So I just wanted to share, if you read some of the pathwork, you might have come across some of these other terms. And we're also talking about, these other ways to recognize other than the real self. It's sometimes called the mask self, the little ego, the mind, child consciousness, the child's emotions and ego-based emotions, not real feelings. The idealized self-image, it's a version of the mask, an idealized version of ourself that we try to live up to. That might be a professional image or an image within our family about being the perfect wife or the perfect dad or something like that. So that's other ways of describing the other self, non-real self. And these compulsive drives, they're also looked at in different ways in the pathwork. And there's a reason the guide, uses these terms and just explores them in different lectures. I'm just going to list them here, but compulsive drives consist of defenses, pseudo solutions, like we think we're getting problem solved and needs met, but we're really not, with our defenses. Being in a vicious circle, having a compulsion to recreate and overcome childhood hurts, having negativity, having what's called this no current, and negative intentionality. So the other self, the mask or the little ego, all of these things aren't real feelings, and they're really just reactions from all of these compulsive drives. So for this particular lecture, these compulsive drives are collectively called the forcing current. So we're just going to use this term of the forcing current. We're not going to dissect what pseudo solutions are and all of that. That's for other lectures. But I think we all know what I'm talking about. Hopefully we all know what I'm talking about when we have a forcing current. And I'm going to talk about the forcing current in just a second. So what is the forcing current? Again, I think you can recognize it just as I probably start talking about it. It's this tight, tense, emotional and energetic current that comes from living in unreality, from not living in our real self. And it's important to note in the lecture that the forcing current it's not inherently bad. It's just a distortion of the healthy desire for love. And that healthy desire for love gets distorted into this sort of childish current that in this lecture is called I want. And it's a demanding and very simple statement. I want, coming from the little ego, from the idealized self, from child consciousness. And multiple times in this lecture, the guide invites us to notice it and feel it as an artificial current, almost like a foreign substance. And for me, it sort of sometimes feels like it's just stuck. It's stuck foreign substance. And it's opposed to what a real flowing current from your real self in alignment with your real self would feel like. This is artificial or foreign. And I wanted to highlight this quote from the guide. Your right, spontaneous, uninhibited expression depends solely on whether or not, to what degree, you become acutely aware of and then let go of the forcing current, I want. And it's this I want that I'm going to, I like pulling in the guide's words. I think the guide's words have a particular energy and convey the material in a way that digesting them just doesn't do quite as well. So here's what I'm calling the root of conflict from page 2. You may feel unhappy if your close and dear ones have certain shortcomings that you particularly disapprove of, or if their opinions vary from yours, or if you are prohibited from pursuing a certain aim. All this is against your will. The child in you thinks that this prohibits your happiness. So you grow from childhood with this deeply hidden, rarely consciously felt conviction. In order to be happy, my will has to be done. As long as you have not found this hidden conviction as a personal recognition, you cannot really successfully arrive at the liberation you desire. The more your intellectual concept and conviction is adjusted to reality, but conflicts with your hidden emotions on that subject, the more difficult it will be to unearth this deep-rooted misconception. So I'm going to highlight for us 2 key points from that passage. As long as you have not found this hidden conviction, in other words, this conviction that in order for me to be happy, my will must be done. Unless you have found this as a personal recognition, you cannot really successfully arrive at the liberation you desire. And I highlight this because, first of all, it's one thing just to read this beautiful lecture material and intellectually understand it, but it's not going to really help you unless you personally recognize how, for you, it's true. Yeah, I think that's good enough for that one. And I guess I also wanted to say that this is the trick. If it's easy to think, oh, I know I do that. I know my problems. I've explored this before, and so on. It's easy to mistake that for a personal recognition and gloss over the feelings underneath that. And the way you tell whether you've gotten at the real feelings underneath that and know you've dissolved your forcing current is whether or not conflict still shows up for you, or this repetition in your relationship, this unpleasant repetition keeps happening. And until you find that personal recognition, unconscious recreations are going to happen. And the key point also is here, your intellectual concept and conviction is adjusted to reality, but conflicts with your hidden emotions on the subject. So again, the guide says in another lecture, we grow up physically, our bodies grow up, and we can see that we're adult and mature. And even our mind interacts regularly with society and others and the outer world. Our mind pretty much grows up too. But our emotions often stay inside, and because they're inside and not allowed out, they stay stuck at a younger, more childish age. So emotions are often, they don't conform with what we think of ourselves in our brain. So this to me is calling us also, if you really want to explore these concepts, it takes some humility. Oh yes, I think I know I've worked on this before, or so on. But why don't I put that aside for a second and explore really what might be hidden down there? And sometimes it will surprise you. The honesty of that and the simplicity of what comes up might surprise you. The guide sometimes says it's neither as easy nor as hard as it might seem, this work. All right, so I'm winding up to the process here that goes on inside of us that we're going to try to work through. So this is what the guide tells us is going on. The mature conscious intellect knows you can't always get your will. But the immature, unconscious, or childish drives do not know that. They only know, I want. And I'm going to stop here and just want to invite whether there's any questions about what I said, because what I'm doing in this presentation is building on these concepts. So in order to move on, I'd like to know if there's any questions about what I just presented. Feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to speak. Clear?
Yeah.
Hi, Saida.
Yeah. Hi. It was very good what you said and underlined, like highlighted the personal recognition, and then began to kind of put some more words on what it really means. I was starting to kind of question myself if it has been experienced by me, and then I was trying also to kind of become aware, because I had these examples, and then I kind of reflect on what is going on inside of me while it is happening. So for me, it's like you also said, like personal recognition. It's not only that you kind of let your mind says so and so. It also has to be like felt and sensed in your body, right? This is what you call like personal recognition. And that I experience a lot, that it doesn't quite like go along, those two, and it's very usual for me that my mind understands, but my body, like I do not sense it in that way. So it must be something unconscious going on, and I find it very challenging and difficult to maybe I here have my forcing current to kind of doing it right, because this is like I'm very much aware of what's like this is not like most of the times it's not like my mind understands so and so, and my body it's like I don't sense it in the right way. So yeah, you wanted a question or what or reflection?
That's great.
So,
I like how you're tracking the teachings, and that's a really good point. Sometimes we don't resonate with this, oh, I want my will, but we walk away from a conversation just feeling like, I wish I had said something different, or I didn't get to say what I really wanted to say, or you're just annoyed with someone. We're being called to look at those things too. It's not like we're being this sort of aggressive jerk and then we have to then look at it. No, we want to have more of our spontaneous real self, but there are these stuck places. And this is the tool the guide is you telling us to use. Somewhere in there, in that annoyance or that withholding or whatever you did in that conversation, there's an I want where you forced something rather than letting your real self out.
yeah, maybe I will connect it to like personal recognition. For me, it's like accepting. Like acceptance is very much like it resonates with me when I kind of personal recognition is equal like accepting, even though I might have some resistance to maybe sense it in my body because of the hidden unconscious currents. I don't know, just something that
That's great.
also yeah.
Yeah, I think you're setting the stage well for the mind mapping exercise that I'm going to do in a minute here. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Janice.
Hey, Sandy, good to see you. You raised your hand.
I'm very much a head person. I live inside my, I intellectualize life a lot. And I'm just really, I was thinking about this distinction, between the real self and it, you know, um, I can only be my real self. I don't think I can see my real self. I can see my idealized self,
Mm.
but I can't see my real self. All I can do is intuitively be that person in the world, and as I live life day to day. And so everything I think that is real about myself is perhaps the ideal self. And what I need to do is just really be intuitive and be very, just try to be as real and as kind as compassionate as I can so that I am my real self, even though I can never, ever see it. That's, just what I'm thinking at the moment. I'm just thinking, is the real self something we can see? And I think not. I think it's something we can just be. That's just.
It could be. This lecture is the beauty of this lecture is that sure, sometimes we can really drop into our intuitive self and the right words and expressions come. When we can't, the guide gives us this bridge in this lecture between how to use our conscious mind to sort of back ourselves into the real self. So it's both. When those times you're very mentally clear and open and have access, that's great. We don't always live there. So when we don't, that's where our problems become beautiful problems, because then we have the tools put forth in these lectures to sort of, okay, tease this part, that's not real, this is a defense, and so on. And then you sort of part the clouds and find the real self. That's what's so beautiful about so many of these pathwork teachings. Okay, so let's continue on here. I'm getting excited to show you the rest of my slides. Okay, so once again, yeah, your conscious intellect knows you can't always get what you want. Your unconscious intellect, unconscious drives, they only know I want, or this forcing current. So the guide says you have an inner current flowing in two directions. This I want, actually, we can break it down. One side of it is pushing ahead towards the fulfillment of whatever it is that you wanted in that moment or from that person. So you can push ahead, you can want to conquer and force others to succumb to your will. And then once that is set up, what automatically gets set up is a counter current of fear or conviction, even against fulfillment, that you'll never get what you want. So this leads to self-sabotage or outwardly trying to get what you want, but using defeatist means or a defeatist attitude. So I'm going to walk us through now how I applied this concept to a situation. And this is a situation from a long time ago. And I would encourage, when you're trying on a new concept like this, it's good to work with it using something that's from the past, that maybe you already kind of know what happened there. You can't go back and fix it, of course, but it's going to be a little bit easier once you have some distance from a situation, from emotional reaction, from a relationship. It's going to be easier to get the hang of this process with something that already happened versus something you're in the thick of right now. So that's what I did here. So the guide tells us that kind of underneath our conscious knowing, there's this perception that in order to be happy, my will has to be done. Oh, let's see. I didn't give you my story. Okay, so back up for a second. Let me tell you my story. I had a boss. I had a job and I had a boss. And this job entailed the writing of reports periodically. And I wrote the report and submitted it to my boss. And she said, "Oh, you did this wrong." And okay, I fixed it. And then I went to do the report next time and I said, "What do you want in this report?" And to be honest, I don't remember the details, but all I know is she would not tell me what she wanted in the report. So I would go back and do the report, submit the report, and she would tell me it was wrong. I didn't do it right. And then I would say, "Well, next time, what do you want in this report?" And for whatever reason, whether I wasn't listening, who knows, she would not tell me. And so this kept happening. And I, of course, would get frustrated. I didn't want to ask questions after a while. And at the same time, I was angry that she wouldn't let me do what it took to do the report correctly the first time. I wanted to do things right. And she was preventing me from being able to do a good job. These were the things that I was feeling. And, because I also sort of stopped asking questions, or I had to think about really hard about, is this the right question to ask? And then be resentful. Well, she's not going to answer anyway. And so it was sort of a simple thing. And back then, I let it build up. And then we had this dynamic going that was not healthy. And I had no idea this was happening, to the extent that one day she said to me, "Well, why are you always so hostile?" And it really took me back, because I had no idea that I was even harboring hostility, let alone projecting it out. All I knew that I was the good guy. I just wanted to do this report and I was frustrated. But somehow it translated into hostility. And who knows, maybe that's why, she didn't want to give me what I wanted. So there's probably enough of the scenario to get us started on what my relationship problem was in this instance. All right, so now let's go to this mapping exercise, as I call it. So the guide starts us out with, okay, be happy, my will must be done. So what was that in this case? What was my will must be done? Again, we don't consciously think, oh, I'm being a jerk, my will must be done. But in this case, I thought I was being the good guy. I wanted to do the report correctly. That was my will must be done in this case. And, I think little emoji there, I thought I was doing the right thing. Now, what we're told in this lecture is that underneath this idea that, oh, I just want to do the report correctly, this is the I want, the forcing current. So it's up to me in this scenario to sort of put my ego aside for a second and like, okay, can I find that? Can I find where I had this sort of pushing, forcing, I want current inside? Despite that, yeah, who doesn't want to do a good job at work? Who doesn't want to submit put all that aside. Do I have this forcing current? Yes. That's the I want we're talking about here. And then in this process, we're asked to explore two sides. The first one being, where do we push because I must get it? And then at the same time, what are we doing because we have this fear that we're never going to get it? Okay, so let's just take that in for a second. Hope everybody's following this thought process. It's not really thinking because it's not conscious, but that's the thought process here. All right, so now we're going to dig in a little bit more. Well, what is this I want? Well, you know what? Once I sat down and looked at it, there was a heck of a lot more that I really wanted that I wasn't conscious of. Well, I wanted to do the report. I also, she's an authority. I want to be obedient and respectful. I wanted to be perfect. I want to avoid punishment for doing a bad job. There was a way in which, she sometimes talked about my predecessor in the job. Well, there was a way in which I wanted to prove that I deserved this job. In other words, once you sort of peek into what's really going on, you'll probably find a lot more than just, oh, I want to do the report correctly. And in my case, for example, wanting to do the report correctly started to conflict with being respectful to my boss. So I could either do the report correctly and try to pound her until she gave me the information and be resentful, or and at that point, I wasn't being respectful. So I was kind of in a double bind because it was one of my wants to also be respectful to the authority and not question the authority. So right there, I already have more complications to my internal life. All right, so then if we flow up to the left-hand side first on the screen here, so let's explore the I must get it. So what does that look like in the situation? Well, kind of going back and forcing the question over and over, and then harboring this tone of hostility because I'm frustrated. I can't just ask the question very dispassionately anymore. I have a hostile tone to my voice. Or I can just kind of go back to my chair and just say, okay, she's the boss, but still harbor this sort of hostile, aggressive energy. Or I could still try to be respectful and obedient and like, well, next time we'll be nice, we'll get along, and then somehow I'll figure out how to get the information I need from her and just not be confrontative. So to try to be nice way of doing it. So those are all ways of just continuing to try because I must get it. So let's look at the other side. What was I doing that sabotaged me because, I also didn't think I'd ever get it. Well, I would doubt myself. Well, maybe I'm not smart enough for this job. Maybe I'm not listening. Maybe she doesn't like me or whatever. Just all these doubts that start spinning and taking up mental space. I can just stew in my own confusion. The wheels are spinning, and I probably wasn't very productive at my job some days if I was just stewing about, well, what needed to be done, what I knew, didn't knew, how should I ask the question? And then there's this, for a perfectionist like me, there was this mental conflict between wanting to do things right and perfect, and then this defeat in like, well, I never do this report right, and I just have to lower my expectations. So I had this sort of counter current, like, oh, you should just give up. So that is sort of the breakdown of what was really going on underneath my wanting to do the report correctly. And as these emojis show, these weren't just, I experienced them back in those days as sort of like, I would think about things and a lot, but there really wasn't the thoughts themselves. It was the emotional reaction underneath that was driving these thoughts. The emotional reaction was the aggression of I must get it, or the desperation and the fear that I never will. So of course, with all this going on, how can you have self-confidence in this scenario? But again, this is what the conscious mind thinks. It's very simple. I just want to do the report. On the other hand, I was throwing all of this out at my boss. If you just look at the reactions at the top, there's 6 different reactions that I brainstormed. My boss didn't know what person she was getting from day to day, or maybe even she got 6 different people in the same day expressing all of these things. So how was my boss supposed to react to that? So this whole thing is a setup for relationship failure. And I don't want to go into this too much because I don't want to get us bogged down in the weeds, but the lecture also gives us some tools to help flesh out and help us recognize these 2 currents. So in case this is helpful when I ask you to do the exercise, I'm going to mention it here. So when you have this, I must or I'll never get it, there's usually 3 different flavors of forcing current that we habitually employ. And we all like to use 1 or 2 as our go-to method. We like to use aggression. If we're will types, we kind of withdraw, oh, no big deal, or I'm above all this, withdrawal reaction, or the submission reaction. Okay, whatever, you're right, I'm wrong, I'm going to do whatever it takes. But I'll figure out how to manipulate my way around somehow. So it looks like I'm submitting, but I'll just find another way. So for any of these 2 basic currents, sometimes it helps to ask yourself, what was I doing here? Was I being aggressive? Was I submitting? Was I withdrawing? So that further can be a tool to help you break down and recognize the forcing current in yourself. Okay, so I just threw a lot of information out there. So I want to check back in and see if did that make sense, and are there any questions before I ask you to do it yourself?
can I say something?
Sure.
Something that I saw in your mapping exercise. What I saw was, when you've written, I must get it. Then there was, what was the second one?
I'll never get it.
Yeah, that was the last one. And the second one was,
I can put it back up there.
yeah, please, because something that I saw there, and I don't know if it was your intention, because I think so. Yeah, the first one is I must get it, then I want and never get it. What I see there is pride, self-will, and fear.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is the triad, because I must get it. It's like, it's my pride, like I have to, because otherwise I'm not good enough, right? And then I want get it. This is my self-will, like I want, and I want it right now. And then I'll never get it. It's clearly like it's fear. Oh my God, I'm afraid that what will happen if I will not get it. So was it your intention? Because all of a sudden I just saw this, and I think it's very useful to use it like in this way.
That wasn't my intention, but what you're speaking of, whenever we talk about aggression, submission, withdrawal, yes, we're talking about those pride, self-will, and fear, those different emotional reactions, yes, and personality types. So it's great that you remembered that and pulled that in.
Yeah, and Janice, also, like I think it was such a great example, because I think we all can recognize these situations with like I also like had a similar situation with my boss, and I know for myself, because I was also reflecting on what was going on, and I think for me it was like it was my demand that she has to do something, because I also had like a female boss, and she was like, she had some techniques, how to kind of how do you say, how to control. And and for me, I was kind of demanding that, like you said, like you wanted her to tell you what to do, because otherwise you were like frustrated. So for me, it was also becoming aware of my demand towards her, which can be like which can maybe activate her reaction to me, and not wanting me to give me what I demand of her. So it was just while you were speaking about this situation of yours, I was also reflecting on mine. So it was, oh, I have the same.
Oh, I'm
So thank you.
great. I'm glad my example resonated. Thanks for sharing, Saida. Anybody else? Okay, Sandy?
Thanks for those comments. I mean, when you initially gave, for example, I saw the forcing I thought you were being hard on yourself, because wanting to do well in your job is a good thing, but I can now see that beneath that motivation were these drives which were not helpful. And so these drives are fear, self-will, and pride, So yeah, because initially I struggled, to say, oh, what was Janice? She was doing everything right in that situation. You were doing everything right, but beneath that, there were other things going on. That's what my understanding.
Yes.
Right.
And that's the trick here, is that the outer outcome, like doing the report correctly, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But everything, it certainly matters what's going on the inside. Yeah.
Okay.
But how, again, how to tease all of this out and become clear about it is the challenge. And then these are the tools. So yes, thank you for sympathizing with my earnestly trying ego self back then, Sandy.
No, that's
Okay, now just another, I'm going to lecture you a little bit more here before having you do the exercise. Okay, so Sandy kind of led us into this. So if I could, now that I've done this process on myself and sort of tease things apart a little bit about what was really going on, sort of parted the clouds a little bit, how would my real self have looked in that situation? So let's start with what my conscious ego self back then might have been looking like. So in order to be happy, my will has to be done. And that looked like doing the report correctly. All right, but what if we correct this premise a little bit and just say, in order to be happy, I want to be real and I want to be able to trust my own motives. That just feels a little bit better, doesn't it? I kind of take a deeper breath and I just sort of relax in my chair a little bit more when I see that formulation of this equation. And so what happens when we start from that place? Well, like Sandy said, like lo and behold, well, I still want to do the report correctly. Yay! But my attitude is going to be a little bit different. It won't be so eager beaver, I've got to do it. It's like, okay, I'm pretty chill here. I know who I am and what I want, and I know this is the right thing to do. Okay, now what? Let's see. So I want to just pause here and just say, okay, where's the I want current? Do I feel an I want pushing, forcing current here? Nope, I don't. And if you don't have that I want current, you don't start this counter current flow of, oh gosh, I must get it. Oh gosh, well, I want it, but I'll never get it. We don't even start that cycle in this scenario. Whew, there's just more space on the screen. It's a little airier. So what happens then? What arises next is, okay, what is my intuitive, honest expression here? I don't know. I just have an open mind. And I'm just still really cool about it. And I know that there are infinite right expressions to choose in the moment. Like there's no right one. There's no right one. I have to put a, criteria grid out there and evaluate my options. That's very mental. And again, sometimes that's good, but we're talking about imagining the real self and the spontaneous, intuitive expression. I know that there's infinite right decisions, and I'll choose in the moment. So what I'm just brainstorming here after the fact, well, I could have just kind of had a non-forcing current way of saying, I just really, this is important to me because I'm new at this job and I'd like to learn from my own professional development. And that's why I keep asking. Or I could have approached the relational part of it head on. Just, I'm feeling some friction and I'm wondering if we can talk about this sometime. If I were coming from a very, clear place, it would be easy to say things like this. Or any other infinite number of ways to respond based on where she's at in that moment and where I'm at in that moment. But really, I sort of mapped the real self and the spontaneous expression for us, but the spontaneous expression is that is just that. There is no thinking about it. I could just have the desire to be happy by being real and trusting myself. I want to do a good job. And maybe that's what happened in the end, as I said, this is important to me. I'm new and I'd like the professional development opportunity here. And I wanted to point out here, when we act from our real self and are spontaneous, and there's no double binds here. So if I'm just honest, I can do the report correctly and I can be respectful at the same time. So some of my wants can be given to me at the same time. They don't have to be mutually exclusive as they were in the original setup, where in order to do the report correctly, I had to sacrifice my respect for my boss. And then, yay! You're real, you trust your motives, you respond appropriately in the moment, and you do so out of self-confidence. All right. Any questions there? All right, I'm going to share my screen again, and in the last half hour we have left, I'm going to have us let's spend maybe 10 minutes doing this exercise. So if you have a piece of paper, I really encourage you to really externalize what's going on the inside, and that's part of this process. Because in order to get out of the forcing current and the scenario that you're in, the key is recognizing these elements so that you are looking at them from the outside. You are not in them anymore. So if you can think of a scenario, again, ideally in the past, it'll be easier. It won't be quite as hard. But of course, the idea is that you'll be able to do this in real time. What is your conscious want in the situation? What does your conscious mind want in this relationship or from this other person? I want this, or I want to be this. In some cases, I want to avoid. What is sort of, if you could distill it, what is the conscious want? And take all the time you need to. I'm going to show you where we're headed. Very similar to what I just showed you. Once you have the conscious part written down, I would say put your pen or pencil down and sit back for a second and close your eyes and feel in if you can find that forcing current. Something else other than the calm, rational outer self. There's something pushing in this scenario inside of you that says, I want something. And once you can find that, build on it a little bit and imagine what is the energy that says, I must get it? What is that driving you to do or say or not do? Or what are you doing that has an aggressive energy? And in that also falls into that category of passive aggression. You may be being passive or quiet, but you'll know by feeling into it whether that's really aggression. And then once you've done that first aspect of the forcing current, feel into the counter current where there's despair or fear or grasping because there's a belief that you'll never get it. And again, in that case, what are you doing, saying, feeling, reacting, putting out there that has this sort of desperate energy or fearful energy? I'm going to give us several minutes here, and I'll leave the screen up so we can sort of flesh out and try this on ourselves. I'm going to give us one more minute on this exercise, and then I will bring us into the next one. All right, well, if you can put a period on whatever you're writing right now, I'm going to go back to the screen and invite us to do another map, which should be a simpler map. And in this case, maybe it's not even a map because it's more of an invitation to part the clouds now that we've sort of mentally discovered what's in our way. Now that we're aware of it, we're outside of that cycle and that forcing current in that situation. So if we're imagining the real self, we just want to be real. We want to trust ourselves and trust that we're good. And we want to just express in an honest, good way. So you can still have, and maybe your outer desire has changed, or maybe it's the same. But what would the real self look like if you just had an intuitive, honest expression now instead of what went on? Trusting that there are infinite right expressions to choose in the moment. And whatever you choose will be the right one. And whether this looks like you're brainstorming multiple possible options that are all right, that's fine. Or just feeling into the experience of knowing that, now that your forcing current is dispensed with, what wanted to emerge or wants to emerge now. And I'll give us one more minute to work on either one of these exercises, whichever one you're on. Take another minute to wrap up what you're working on. And if you like, turn your video back on. And I'd just like to check in with people. Is there anyone who wants to share what their experience with this was like? And this isn't for, expecting or giving advice. It's just sharing what your experience of the exercise was. Okay, so now that we've done this exercise, I wanted to bring in some of the beautiful spiritual words that the guide does say in this lecture. This lecture has some of my favorite phrases in path work. So we can read lectures. We could read this very lecture and just come away with, a beautiful sense of spiritual wisdom. And that would be a valid reading of this lecture as well. It just so happens that, I chose to walk us through this particular work. But the guide does say some beautiful things about self-confidence, that once you do this work, once you reach that state, you will experience certain feelings which are almost impossible to convey in words. You simply have to experience them. And I'd like to read from this on page 7. There's the guide has a whole paragraph where she lists, even though it's impossible to describe in words, attempts to describe what it's like to just live continually from this place of self-confidence, relief of a burden, joy and liberation, deep inner knowledge coming from your solar plexus, the best you can be, poised, unrepressed, without inhibitions, the right thing at the right time, when to speak, when not to speak, relaxed and contented, or concentrated, relaxed and concentrated, fully awake, aware, and alive to the moment. All I can say is that the relief of a burden you have unnecessarily carried will be so tremendous that your joy and liberation will be a strongly felt reality. Beautiful. I just think those words are so motivating. Because at the end, that's what we're going for. That's what we're going to build in our lives when we do the work of finding and dissolving this artificial forcing current that has sort of come to be the reality. All right. Any final thoughts on the exercise or the teaching? What struck you in any way from the teaching, the exercise that you didn't expect? Yeah, exactly. Again, that's what I love about the guide's teachings. I find they're a bridge. They're a bridge between, we can be super smart mentally. How do we recognize and put words to what's going on the inside? And the guide says that our real feelings is where our real self comes from. So it's important to have this bridge and this conscious awareness of our feelings and invite them and live from them more. Thank you. Right. Well, thanks everybody for participating. I will like to close. I often like to close with some words from the guide. The guide says, "This is a benign universe. You have nothing to fear if you come out of your illusion. If you give up the fear as well as the error that your little self can be the judge of what brings you happiness. Let your big self, your real self, that is so much nearer than you believe, guide you in the stream of life. Go in peace, my friends. Rejoice in the knowledge that reality must make you happy. Be blessed. Be in God." All right. Thanks everybody for being here. Next month, Cher Ibarra, one of my apprentice helper colleagues, is going to be talking about something very similar. Her presentation is called "Self-Liking is Necessary for Love." And the guide, as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, the guide thinks that these concepts are all so important that they do need to be fleshed out in multiple ways. So here we have self-confidence, and Cher is going to talk about self-liking in relationships next month. So with that, I thank everybody for coming, and reach out to Pathwork of California. My information's there. If you need it, it's in the flyer that IPF published. Find me if you have more questions. And see you next month.